这个是什么呀？就是夜景，夜曲。
我觉得我们这里是这
然后它第一节的话，总体来说是 peaceful。然后 bar 是这个
Okay, I want to hear from you guys. Alright, so I will start in the back.
How do you say 白鸟的几个手 We're looking up a word. Give us a second.
Okay, okay.
没有带上来写，是谁写？
What are you looking up?
对啊，然后他自己还写的是什么？
Synesthesia. We can continue the discussion, but let's continue it together as a group. Alright, so let's read it out loud first. Joey, you've taken French, right? Can you read the title for us?
It's about the same pronunciation in English. Impression de Matin.
Du Matin. Okay. What does it mean in English?
In English.
Yes.
The impression of de Matin.
Matin. What is the Matin?
It is. Oh, so de Matin isn't a name or something?
No.
Oh.
You might be thinking of Martin, which is a name. Impression of Matin. So this is not right by Matin. It's by Oscar Wilde. So this is not like, is it Matin's impression? This is Oscar Wilde's impression of something else. Does anyone know this word?
Twilight, like the morning.
Morning. Yeah, morning. Not twilight, which would be the evening.
Oh yeah.
More like morning or possibly dawn, which is what we seem to see here. So Impression du Matin, or Impression of the Dawn, by Oscar Wilde, whom we of course know. Let's read it out loud together. Can we start with you, Rain, and we'll go forward up this row.
The time songs of blue and gold changed to a harmony in gray. A barge with ochre-colored hay drops from the wharf in chill and cold.
Kevin.
The yellow fog came creeping down. The bridges till the house's walls seemed changed to shadows, and St. Paul's loomed like a bubble over the town.
And suddenly arose the dawn of waking life. The streets were stirred with contra windows, and a bird flew to the glistening roofs and song.
The one pale woman all along, the daylight kissing her was wearing hair. Loitered beneath the gas lamp split, with lists of flame and colorstone.
So what do we see here literally happening? What is the setting? Early morning, time and place. London. Yeah, how do we know it's London, Blanche?
The times.
Yeah, the Thames.
Thames.
The Thames River. Okay. London is one of many cities that's famously known for its iconic river, right? Can be identified in that way. All right, so we have the time and the place. What happens, or what is the focus of this poem, Daisy? Depicting a scene, yeah. So what happens in this scene? Well, what do we have first?
We have a barge.
The barge, which is what?
Which is a boat.
Yeah.
Like a shipping boat.
Going along the river, maybe carrying some cargo. In this case, what is the cargo?
Hay.
Hay. Hay dropped from the wharf. What is the wharf?
The wharf is like
the dock. Yeah. So hay has been dropped on to this barge from the dock. Now the barge is going along the river. what happens next? Gina?
So sunrise, the sun rises and well, Wilde doesn't explicitly say that the sun rises, but you can tell that from the yellow fog came creeping down, and everybody wakes up and gets to work.
Yeah. So later we know, right, that people are getting up, they're stirring. So far in this stanza, no people yet though, right? We begin with the river and the barge in the Thames. We then go to the yellow fog, we're introducing the houses. And St. Paul's, this is St. Paul's Cathedral here, which looms over London with its large dome, actually. He compares to a bubble.
Why does he compare it to a bubble?
Because it looks like
The shape. It looks like a bubble.
It looks like a dome, right? So not perfectly spherical like a bubble. Right? So I get what you mean. Yeah. Why does he compare it to a bubble? It seems interesting, but I don't know. What is the tone of comparing a church dome to a bubble?
Lively.
Lively,
Childish.
kind of childish, maybe like self-consciously or deliberately sort of childish. Also a little bit irreverent. He's not talking about like the stately power of this symbol of London or its religious significance. He's calling it a bubble. This is something very light, very temporary, weightless, insignificance. Alright, we go on. What happens next again? Third stanza.
There's like people wake up, or maybe not wake up, maybe like after work or somehow like that, and the streets are like crowded, and wagons are like people are walking wagons, they're like walking on the streets, and the description of the birds like kind of break the silence. Yeah, like a bird flew to the listening rooms and sang, like the sand kind of break the silence and make the poem or like make the atmosphere into a different condition.
Yeah. So what technique is this? What is the author using here to break the silence, as you say? Easy.
I don't know.
So there's imagery,
Yeah.
right? And then there's what goes with imagery, but it's not necessarily from the eyes, other senses. What do you call that? Yeah. Could be yeah. So this is an auditory detail. It's a kind of sensory language, right? So it's giving us images, but it's also suggesting noise. Right? All this creates an atmosphere. Yeah. So you mentioned that the people are working, but he hasn't mentioned any people yet, actually. So he's mentioned the barge previously, he mentions the fog and the shadows, the wagons, the noises like the clang and the streets which were stirred, the glistening roofs, but no individual figures yet until we come to the final stanza. Helen, what happens here?
The author, the poet depicts a woman.
Tell us about this woman.
And she's beautiful because she has lips of flame and daylight is kissing her head. But she has a heart of stone.
Yeah, daylight is kissing her wand hair. What is wand? Anyone know?
Pale? Gray?
Could be pale, yeah, probably literally pale, but with what kind of connotations? If we were going to talk about emotions or characteristics.
being weak, unlikely.
Yeah, perhaps like weak, maybe even worn out, exhausted. Not healthy, perhaps. So I believe you would agree, we see a change in sort of mood or atmosphere in this poem. So let's start with the first stanza, going again to you guys, Thomas and Joey in the back. What's the best word to describe the mood? Describe in just the first stanza.
I'm gonna go with silent.
Silence.
Mood. I think contemplate. That's
Silence.
Peaceful.
Peaceful. You said contemplative.
Yes.
Mm.
But that's more likely to be tone.
And we could call it mood as well, I think. How about the next one? The yellow fog creeping down, rain or gavin. Any shifts in the mood here, and if so, in what way? How would you describe it?
I thought of melancholy because I feel that yellow fog has an ominous feeling, and it feels like, like air pollution.
Yeah.
Yeah, air pollution. So, but then they say that this is the sun rising, so maybe the sun rising has a more positive connotation, even though I didn't actually feel it.
Yeah, it's tricky, right? And it says that the house walls seemed changed to shadows. Right? So it seems to be darkening, even though it's dawn.
And the speaker.
What was it?
Creeping down.
Yeah, almost. Yeah, the phrase "creeping down" also has a creepy sort of mood or suggestion, right? So this is a very, I would say, moody sort of scene, right? We kind of want it to be optimistic because it's the sunrise, but the specific language and imagery doesn't suggest it.
Like there was fog, but when the sun rises, it dyes the fog that has no color with yellow. And as light travels by, it seems like the more fog are dyed with yellow, and like the fog will keep creeping down.
Yes, exactly. So we have a sort of a gradual lightening through the fog, right? which would actually be air pollution. London at this time was very polluted, right? So yeah, in the morning maybe all you would see in front of you was a yellow fog to signify that the dawn had come. People would sometimes accidentally walk into the Thames River because they couldn't see a few feet in front of them because the pollution was so bad. But actually this pollution, like we see in present day Los Angeles, sometimes mixes with the color from the sun to make some very beautiful imagery. We have a shift in tone, again, I would say, in the third stanza. So Elaine and Helen, how would you describe the mood here, and how does it change from previously? We talked about it a bit already.
The mood.
Yeah.
Helen said this stanza is like a representation of urbanization and industrialization.
Yeah.
And so like maybe the mood here indicated
Yeah, busy. Do we have another word for like busy, this kind of atmosphere? What was it? Buzzing or bustling? Bustling, yeah. I think it could be either, but yeah, bustling is better, I think. Yeah, so we have kind of a bustling atmosphere. Almost like hectic, but not quite hectic, because that would suggest it's like crazy out of control. But bustling, like busy, starting to become busy. We have morning traffic. It's interesting, right? You mentioned urbanization and sort of industrialization, which is an important theme, right? But then he doesn't mention like cars or factories. He mentions country wagons, which almost makes it seem more like a sort of a landscape, country sort of traditional scene with emphasis on nature. We have that bird singing, again, nature imagery. I don't know, is this moody like the previous stanzas? Do we have any shift in attitude or feeling here? What do we think, Daisy? Lunch?
I think this stanza is actually more romantic than the previous stanzas because it mentions like how the sun plays with the woman's hair and leaves the flame and how it's.
Oh, we're still in this one. Third one.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah.
I think there's in the rise of hope. Previous ones are creating an atmosphere, but this one it introduces the sounds and the bustlings of the country life, and so it gives, I think, a positive connotation.
Yeah, I would say a little more of a positive feeling. Right? Definitely a contrast with the kind of silence from before to the bustling atmosphere here. All right, and then you had some ideas about the final one, which is probably the biggest shift, right? We sometimes call this the turn, like the final part of the poem that maybe gets to the main points it's trying to emphasize, or that influences the way we interpret the rest of it. This pale woman all alone. Yeah. So what do you think about her in the atmosphere here?
Like when you think of pale woman, and especially with blonde hair, you think of maybe an old lady that is in the twilight of her life. But here it is the dawn of the city, and the daylight seems very joyful, and I think there is some sort of romanticism in this stanza that is against the dying of the life.
So yeah, some romanticism in the emphasis on the sort of beautiful, on the feminine, on the sort of maybe vitality, something like this, in contrast to the environment. Daisy, do you agree that you have a different view? So why is she loitering beneath the gas lamp's flare with lips of flame and heart of stone? So the gas lamps, right, those would be lit at night. It is now dawn. They will be put out soon, right, because they're not necessary. It would be a waste of energy. For now, they're still burning. She stands beneath them. What might this symbolize? Sort of burning of lamps, the flare. Her lips are also aflame. What does it suggest about her?
So Jean, does the lips here refer to like the lips of daylight, of sunshine?
No, it refers to her lips, right? Because one pale woman, etc., with lips of flame.
Oh.
So it's referring to her. We'll talk more about the woman in a minute. I want to hear your opinions about it. Two questions. Yeah, one, who is this woman? What's she doing there? And second, why does the author represent this sort of shift or development in mood through the poem? Right? What is he trying to represent there? Right. So take 2 minutes, discuss with your partner.
So I think it's a contrast between IB diction, individual, and society. Oh yeah, you can see early here. Well, we can see does for everything awakens, but it's still here. But it's just not one part. See, tail, so there's a not only the mood of the city, also the situation of the woman, her in the coldness, although the world outside of her going to the more discovered place. Or you can see the diction of voices.
I think it symbolizes, or the part symbolizes insult.
Or you can see that they like, or beneath the gas. Yeah. So maybe you can realize that the gas weigh much more than daylight.
Well, like, if I were to think about this, I would associate it to, like, I don't know, very
About the heart of
people or very because they are
But what about it seems like the one? I think the one is of like
Alright, what? Quiet
because like the the mood of the time
Why would a person have this?
meanwhile she has part of the
Well, part of them would be that she doesn't like alter so I can't have a heart of stone. I can also part of them going
do you agree that like impulses by the like is suppressed by society turning
maybe she is.
Wow.
She's
has-
Wow. I mean, apparently there's a difference between like
what is her identity?
Which would make her seem to have
Okay. I want to hear. I want to hear it in literal terms. Yeah, who is this woman? What is she doing there? All right. I want to start with Tiana and Chian.
Okay, so one of our ideas is that the woman is a symbol of nighttime.
Okay.
So this is mainly because like well, aside from her her pale face and wet and blonde hair, which is sort of associated with night. During nighttime, these people also like to hold these gas lamps to see, and which is sort of like a visual communication with people. And since the woman has lips of flames, it could be symbolic of her way of talking in a sense to people, to other people. And since night also goes through this life cycle every day, and since it's the twilight of her nighttime, so she would probably have a heart of stone to us because she's old and seen a lot of stuff, so she's impervious to all our worldly events, which would make her seem to have a heart of stone.
So the oldness or sort of imperviousness or seen it all aspect, that would symbolize night as well, because night is like an eternally recurring thing. I see. And you say the lips are of flame, how she speaks to people. Well, how does night speak to people? Why would night have lips of flame?
Well, because people usually like lose vision to travel easily during night, and so they create by fire in this room. So.
Yeah. I see. And how about up here? Who's this woman?
Symbol of like the old that is inevitably going to die and going to be replaced by the new. And because daily things that the daylight, like the interaction between the woman and the daylight is like an inevitable process of you taking over the while the old like the lady is still lingering on the flare of the gas lamps.
But it's not necessarily a negative connotation because the interaction is kissing, which may suggest something about the cycle being a natural, being a positive thing.
Yes, I see. How about Elaine and Helen? Who's the woman?
Do you think that she's like this old woman, which is like detached from this like quick and fast change of society and America?
It's just like an outside.
So detachment from the changing environment, the fast pace of the modern life that we see described in the third stanza. Who is this woman? Right, Gavin.
We have disagreements.
All right, excellent. This is what I like. This table, everyone who sits at this table has disagreements. This is what I realized when I've done demo classes in here and stuff. Yeah.
I think she is of a quiet character, and she's probably like someone who is like weak, like physically and also mentally. But Rain thinks that she's probably someone. Okay.
So I think that she is a typical like middle-aged lady in London back then, and I don't think that she has any like more.
She thinks it's a sassy middle-aged woman.
I don't think that she has any more abstract symbols.
Okay.
For example, like night and I don't know, city or something. I think that this is just because this is the impression of the city and dawn at dawn. So this is probably just a middle-aged lady who gets up very early, works all day, is very tired, therefore she has lips of flame and heart of stone. Which lips of flame, I didn't interpret it literally as like red lips. I thought that since flames are, I don't know, sort of aggressive and harmful, so I think the lips of flame means that this person is maybe very critical in words and yeah, or something like a very debating person. So I think that this is just like a representation of typical middle-aged women in London back then.
I like it.
But I think there's no other like, there's no like being like aggressive elements in this poem elsewhere. So I think she's probably not like sassy as how Range.
Yeah. So you're both viewing her as kind of a real character, but with different characteristics. Right, I like it. So Thomas and Joey.
Yeah, so I see her as a real character also, who is an individual and who is being focalized inside this big theme, the big landscape of London City.
Okay, good word use, focalized, yeah.
Yeah, of being focalized. So I think she is being here to say that there is a contrast between the awakening of society, but we can see pale woman like a individual is still being trapped, being oppressed by the situation, living situation of being pale and like one hair. But we're not sure about why she has these features. But when we see the awakening daylight, the sense of hopeful, the sense of hope, but it's just loitering below the lamps of flare, and her heart is still like a stone. So you can see that she is kind of desperate in this place, but she also has the lips of flame. So I think it symbolizes the tendency of her to change her fate, to have a better life, or to pursue something, maybe as love or something else. But her heart is still being oppressed by the society. Although the society is bustling, but she is depressed. She is still has to live in a quiet and lifeless situation.
So you think it has, so from these details you've read a lot about her as an individual, you've read a lot about how she might be responding to her society. So perhaps the poem is commenting on both.
I think she's kind of like being, like, the lamp's fire is like, it can be like, sorry, like, I can't think of the word, like, the daylight is so strong compared to the lamp's fire, and when the daylight actually comes, like, the lamp's fire have to, like, move aside and give the way to the daylight, and that's probably the situation of hers as well.
How about the word loitered?
Loitered, yeah.
She is, like the lamp fire is, like, living on borrowed time or something, like, she's gonna go home, like, soon, I think, and she is just cherishing, like, the daylight that she has.
But the connotation of loitered is really negative when it kind of, it doesn't fit the sense of daylight, the energy of life, but it seems to be like weak.
Yeah, I think there's a contrast between like a melancholy character and the bustling city.
Yes. Okay. Well, loitered, loitering is actually a crime.
Yeah.
Right? Loitering, you can be kind of hassled by the police for loitering. It kind of means hanging around in one area for too long, kind of doing nothing. Why do you think that would be a crime? Loitering, literally just standing around. Why would this be something that they would make a law that they could prosecute you for? At least right.
You think you're gonna do something bad, or you're probably planning on something bad.
You're not participating in the order of city.
This is true, yeah. Not participating in at least the ordinary, get up in the morning and go in the bustling business of the city sort of thing. Maybe up to no good. Joey, I didn't hear from you. Did you have a different interpretation from Thomas?
No, we have an agreement.
Oh, all right, excellent. This is a model, to follow numbers. So you guys, I have to say, are a perfect audience for this poem because you're in many ways very much like what a late 19th century reader of this poem would have been like. You have lots of sophisticated ideas about the symbolism of this woman and the perhaps political or social commentary of this poem. But you're a little bit innocent and naive to who this woman actually is. as many people at the time would have been, in spite of this being a very common thing. Why is a woman standing alone all night, and then even into the early hours of the dawn when everyone else is asleep?
So it's about prostitution.
She is actually a prostitute, we can
What?
probably assume.
I forgot.
Yeah.
I had that speculation last.
But you were too nice. Yeah, so you have, this is how many people would have responded, right? Like you have some speculation, but then you go, no, I'm not gonna think this thoughts. This is not appropriate for polite society, we won't discuss this.
When I saw the word poetry, I actually thought of it, but I think it's not going to happen. So
Yeah, well, I mean, we don't know this for a fact, but I think it's a definite implication here, but I don't think that invalidates anything you guys have said, right? She still could be a symbol of the knights. Definitely still could represent a detachment from this sort of fast-paced environment. She could be in some ways a quiet and weak character, other ways kind of a hard-working, rough-edged character. And yeah, she is maybe symbolic, but also a focalized individual, right? She's the only individual that is focused on in here. Maybe there's a reason for that. Maybe she is living life her own way, in a way that makes her an outsider, and as you observed, in a way that makes her very conscious of her isolation or her own sort of will, in contrast to the environment around her. You mentioned, a few people mentioned middle-aged. I believe she may be middle-aged, or at least middle-aged by the standards of the day, as many prostitutes might have been. She might just be in her like mid-30s or something. So not old necessarily, but not a young maiden, as many poems tend to focus on.
Mr. John, this is the exact same image as the last image of how you play the sunrise. You know, exactly the same. When a prostitute called Chen Bai Lu
I don't know this play. This is a Chinese play.
Yeah, Chinese play.
Oh, good.
I mean, it is when the prostitute that is like serving all the wealthy people inside a room, and when the daylight arrives, when the sun arises, daylight is like dawn, and she steps out of the room like to the balcony, and she just embraces the daylight, but then she is back to this room of darkness of gas lamps, flares, and she like real situation of being trapped like in a state of prostitution.
Yes, I like it.
Like exactly the image when the sun rises, the city awakens, and she steps out, heart is like us.
So I love this because now we have these sort of universal connections, right, that are happening, the things that pop up in literature, portraying the same character or the same concept, using the same symbolism, the same atmosphere, in the same way. When would that have been written? Would that have been a 19th century thing or earlier?
Oh, it's early 20th century, but early 20th century in China is like this time.
Yes, yeah. So actually, very fitting, very appropriate.
So that's why he uses oil and lips of flame.
Yes.
That's so cool.
And a heart of stone, of course, which is a cliche to say someone has a heart of stone. And he's aware of it's a cliche. He's aware that it's a cliche. So this is one interesting thing about this poem. The other interesting thing, the other thing we want to examine is, why does he portray this moment in this way? Why describe this sort of change in mood? Rain, you were on the right track. What is he doing with this poem?
Sorry, I'm still recovering from.
Yeah.
What?
So, Rain, this poem, what is it doing? So you are of the opinion that it's not very symbolic, right? But it's just doing what?
So he's just depicting typical cities at dawn. City at dawn.
Yeah, a city at dawn. Has anyone here ever watched a sunrise? Yeah. So can you kind of understand the feeling he's trying to evoke here when we go from kind of darkness to this sort of very, very silent atmosphere to the rising light, to suddenly you start to hear the sounds around you of people beginning to wake up and things beginning to happen. I believe he's portraying this scene, his impression of the scene specifically, what it feels like to be in this moment, observing these things, especially with the first three stanzas. This relates to the next thing I wanted to talk about, which is the relationship between impression and impressionism, yes, and the relationship between writing and painting, and in fact other arts during this time. So I sent you a series of paintings in the WeChat. I would like you to, with your partner, look over these and try to decide which you think best matches the impression or atmosphere that Wilde tries to capture in his poem, which is the best fit. Take about 3 minutes to do that.
Polarizing. Like it has the yellow wall.
Is one of them too small to see?
Oh, you can.
I think first is like this one. You know, there's well, oh, there's no daylight here.
It's not even like watercolor. I think it has.
Well, there's no daylight here. There's enough blue and chilly. So the color here is just a cold chilly.
And gray, blue and gray, and some gold.
Yeah, so I think gold is just lighter.
Yes. From the right
Yeah, I mean here's the war.
Oh, yeah.
Oh yeah. You can see
Oh, wow. Lady, oh, we have here a crush. It seems to be on night. I guess it could be the dawn as well. Hard to tell. Looks very cold and wet. Give you 1 more minute. Try to come to an agreement. Be prepared to defend your answer or explain why you think it gives you a similar feeling.
Four.
Do you think this one?
The second stanza, it has houses and walls of brickets. So I expect urban
Yeah.
instead of this really desolated river.
Or it's very like gloomy here, where you cannot see things clearly and there's kind of yellow fog. I think it's everything is double, very safe kind of being
Okay. I'm going to call on randomly Joey.
Okay. So the first stanza, I think it would be blue, cold, gray, and a bit gold. So I think it's the 6th one.
6-1.
Yeah.
Different order in my slides. So let's see.
And the blue one.
the blue black one.
This one.
Yes.
Yes. Okay.
Because it has blue and gray for its main colors and black as well. So it conveys a feeling of cold and chilling, but it has a bit of light on it. Maybe it's light or stars, and that's symbolizes the lights before the dawn. Yeah, I think it's quite fitting. And then the yellow fog. Bridges, houses, shadows, bubbles over the town. The first yellow imagery, the first is yellow image, but I don't think it is the right picture for the second stanza, because I think the second stanza has bridges and houses, so it can't be too barren. So I think it is the 5th one, the most yellow one.
This one.
Yeah. And the 3rd one, walking life, the emergence of life and streets were stirred, wagons, bird singing. It is quite a lively imagery, so I think it's the last one.
The last one.
Yeah. And the final one, pale woman, and gas lamps flare, lips of flame. I think this could be the 4th one. Yeah.
Okay. So you think this one for the 3rd stanza?
Yes.
Okay. And then for the final, which one is it? This one?
No.
Stop. Tell me. Say when.
This one.
This one. Okay. Why this one for the final stanza?
Because the woman is pale, so this conveys a tone or the overall feeling for the readers that a cold color, and the daylight, although there's daylight and flare and flame, these kind of things symbolize fatality, but the overall feeling is desperate and disappointing. So, and lamps light, so it is quite fitting that there's gas here and lamps here. So yeah.
Do we agree with this one for the 1st stanza? Anyone have something different? The 1st stanza.
Daisy and I think that the second one by Monet.
This one. So this is the famous one by Monet.
Yeah, I think this one is better suited to the scene described in the poem.
Yeah. Why?
Because first, it says about the color of blue and gold, and also gray, ochre, and yellow. But it's not like separate colors. It's like all the things, including the barrier of the day and night. They're mixed together. They're blending together. And here, the sky of blue and gold suggests this sort of blending and transition process. And also, I think the poem gives a sort of view of like vastness and a sort of broad view, because when it says about like center poems like a bubble, so it's like overlooking the landscape of whole London.
Yeah, it's kind of up. You seems to be looking almost from above, like from a sort of a detached POV, right? Yeah.
And like you mentioned. So I think this kind of blocks your view by this huge bridge building here, and so it gives you a sense of stuffness. So I think maybe that famous one is more suitable for this poem because it gives you a sense of broadness and overlook of the sunrise.
Yeah, I think so. So this is an example of Impressionism. This is arguably the first Impressionist painting, okay, called Impression Sunrise by Monet. And what did the Impressionists do that was different from what previous artists had done? Does anyone know?
They capture the feelings and atmosphere of the scene instead of like describing the physical features, details of it.
Yeah, more focus on the impression, right? The feeling and the atmosphere itself, above trying to represent each specific detail, right, of the scene itself. So you can see they use this technique of kind of obvious brush strokes here, right? This looks very fake. You can kind of see that the artist just put these blobs of color here. This is in no way sort of photorealist. We have these large washes of color that sort of blended together. So it seeks to capture scenes as they are perceived in the moment by people. It's often beautiful, like we see here. There's often a focus on nature and landscapes in particular. This is one of the most popular forms of art around today, but at the time it came out, it was very controversial, right? Because it was new, because it was experimental. It began a new movement in art that really focused more on perception, which was a precursor to things like modernism and all of the later experimentation that we saw in art. Writers like the imagist Ezra Pound, whose poem In a Station of the Metro we looked at, as well as other writers like Hemingway and T.S. Eliot, were very influenced by this kind of impressionist technique. They lived in Paris at the time that these things were taking place. Paris was at the forefront of this kind of renaissance in art and experimentation in art around the turn of the century. This is why the title of Wilde's poem is in French, okay? Or one of the reasons at least. So this would be in contrast to something continuing to happen at the same time, which was realism, which sought to portray reality with a kind of objective truth and realistic detail. It's not purely scientifically objective though, because there's often an emphasis on grittiness and sort of the underclass and the oppressed in society, political subtext. So like what we see here might be more of an example of realism. This is, I believe, a portrayal of the Liverpool docks by John Atkinson Grimshaw. So Impressionism did focus on nature, but it also portrayed the industrial development that was taking place at the time. Sometimes appreciatively, as arguably here, right? Kind of fascinated by the aesthetic appearance of this train station and the atmosphere it creates. Other times more critically, as we see it here, sort of invading this idyllic natural scene with its noise and heavy smoke. Other artists, such as J.M.W. Turner, whose painting we see here, and the sort of American, sort of British artist, James Earl McNeill Whistler, whose work we see here, kind of had their own unique style. This is not quite impressionist. It is a little bit realist, a little bit romantic. There's a level of abstraction. Blanche, as you pointed out, right, we kind of see this light here, or sorry, I was going to put this up. Maybe it was you. No, Joey, yes, you pointed out. But we're not sure what it is. It could be starlight, it could be a reflection of light from houses. It's a little bit abstracted. We're not quite sure what we're seeing, but it evokes a mood very strongly. this is kind of similar to Expressionism, which focused on the artist's expression of their own emotions in the way they portrayed something. It's also similar to Modernism, which would kind of abstract things and put focus on color itself more than what it's portraying. So this, again, by Whistler. So actually, these two paintings rather, are explicitly referenced in Wilde's poem. This one is called Nocturne in Blue and Gold at Old Battersea Bridge. This one is called Harmony in Gray, Chelsea and Ice. These are referenced in the first two lines of Wilde's poem. Wilde and Whistler were in fact friends, and kind of had a correspondence about their work. It's one of also a series of poems by Wilde that were inspired by these kinds of paintings. The paintings themselves, you'll notice in their titles, reference music. This one is in Nocturne, right? This one refers to the harmony in Gray. This kind of almost suggests that what it's trying to capture here is a mood similar to what we get from music, but that is much more abstract. We don't know why music affects us in a certain way, but it produces a particular feeling. The artist here is trying to do the same thing, but using a visual medium. I'll play a little bit of a nocturne. It's the famous one you guys have probably heard. So we see here in the kind of interplay between music and painting and literature, and especially with these new forms of painting and new forms of literature, a reflection of the kind of aesthetic philosophy that we were introduced to in the decadent movement and in Wilde's work. This emphasis on art being beautiful, but also being something that is all about the expression of the artist, or art for art's sake. Not something that needs to be a genuine representation of nature or getting any values from nature or anything like that. It might portray nature, as we see here, but it does it in a way that emphasizes that it is art. Right? That is something quite different from a neutral portrayal of a scene. Which takes us back to the poem. So we see an emphasis on color, blue and gold, harmony and gray, ochre-colored hay, yellow fog, the glistening roofs. We see an emphasis on atmosphere, creation of different atmosphere. We see this sort of, as people have pointed out, distant view as of a landscape painter that the artist seems to take on. The artist himself, the poet, his own personality doesn't necessarily come through here. Similarly, in the Impressionist painting that we see, or the experimental ones, we are absorbed in the painting itself.
we are reminded maybe of our own feelings, right, when we see something similar, but it does not seem to be a personal statement or expression from the artist about anything in particular. We also don't necessarily have thematic content here. We do see it go from the silence and the colds to the creeping down of the yellow fog, human civilization in terms of the buildings becoming visible, people waking up, and the street becoming more bustling. But this could just be an observation, an appreciation of the way these things happen, simply for their own sake, for the kinds of impressions or feelings that they might give you as you're observing them. Well, as you listen to the sounds, as you see the colors, as you kind of soak in the atmosphere. On the other hand, at the same time, we could say there is some kind of political content, at least because it is reflecting something about what the artist is seeing. So if there's business taking place, it's reflecting that. Just as in the image we saw, there are trains in the background because that's simply what's happening. The thing that makes this different is, of course, its focus on a portrayal of this one figure. So why do we think Wilde throws this woman in here, perhaps controversially, into his own portrayal of things? Maybe this tells us something about him and his literary project, what he's all about, what he's trying to do. So we'll end on this question for today, except I want you to do one thing. I want you to look up an image of Shanghai. Yeah. And I want you to write one stanza of a poem in the same meter and rhyme scheme as you see here. So it's A-B-B-A, right? Golds, gray, hay, coal. And you will be taking a similar approach. You can focus on a landscape or a portrait of an individual and describe it in a way that helps us to picture it or get a vivid impression of it. Okay. So work with your partner or individually on this, but I encourage you to look for images now. Try to find one you want to write about. Well, no, just the rhyme scheme. Right? So he follows that same pattern throughout the poem. A, B, B, A. Yeah. Eight syllables per line. Every line is exactly the same. So, quick note, right? If we search online for images of Shanghai, what we get is a lot of similar stuff, like this, where it's sort of pictures of the buns, or the Pudong side of the buns, lit up at nights, these kinds of like tourist photo type views. These are okay, but a little bit generic. they don't maybe capture the spirit in quite the same way. Ideally, you might use your own photo, although I don't know you haven't maybe taken photos of Italy that much. Yeah, so this is the kind of thing we see very often. This is cool, worth writing about in some cases, but I don't know. I don't want everyone to write the same thing.
Anywhere in Shanghai.
Anywhere, absolutely anywhere, including right outside the window if you want. But let's say it should be recognizably Shanghai, or at least recognizably China. I don't want to feel like I'm reading something that is in America. It should have the capture some spirit of the city, just as Wilde's poem does.
So what is Shanghai's spirit?
Good question.
This is the question, yeah. Maybe the spirit of London is the spirit of a prostitute, in Wilde's view. What is Shanghai's spirit? I like this one. Nice.
We only need one stanza or 4 stanzas.
Just one stanza.
Is it due tomorrow?
It's due now. I don't know. Yeah, I guess.
Or only the picture, or
Oh, find the picture and do one stanza.
I can't find it. Seriously?